Okay, we're back on the show here. I got a new co-host. Linda Valente has joined me here. Linda, how's it going so far?
Very well.
I know you're. Yeah?
It's doing really well. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, well, we're glad to have you. Cassandra had to leave, but and then you walked right in the room right at the perfect moment. Not only that, but our next guest, Kevin Fox, is here, and he had the lights that are allowing us to continue the show here, even though it's getting dark outside.
That's why they're interviewing me.
No, because you were on the agenda before. Yes. We thought the light was going to hold out a little bit longer, but anyway, we're glad you're here, and not just for the lights. So, boy, it sounds like I know you're a photographer, but it sounds like you're from a family where there's a lot of artistic talent into it. And I'm just curious, what was it? How did you get into photography? What drew you to it?
Well, I come from a performing arts background. All my siblings, my brothers anyway, are all into performing arts, and I was an actor in the 80s in Toronto, and I got cast in the Buddy Holly story that went to Broadway. And so I went to New York City with that show, and it's a great way to go to New York City. There was a guy whose job it was to find us all apartments.
Wow.
The worst
place
thing you ever have to do is trying to find an apartment in New York City.
Yeah.
And when the show closed, I stayed for 19 more years.
Really?
And I still actually have a place down there and go down quite regularly to work. But early on in my time there, I wanted to set myself up with my own kind of home business, and I had a hobby of photography. I wanted to get really into photography on a hobby level. And I sort of thought, you know what, I'm in the performing arts, and that would be a great way to sort of maybe make some money shooting that. So I started shooting actors' headshots, singers and models, and dancers, CD covers for musicians, and it just sort of kept growing and growing till I had a fairly good-sized studio
in New York,
Fifth Avenue and 20th Street for many years, just shooting everything. I'm sort of like I have a million fortes, and I know what you're thinking. Lots of fortes means no forte at all.
Well, no, but that's because I have the same problem, maybe.
Right.
But I'm curious, is there any of those CD covers that we might recognize?
No, there's a lot of New York City people that, cabaret performers and different people, and no big famous people.
So why did you come back to Toronto?
Well, a variety of reasons. I mean, I can get cabin fever in New York after 20 years. We still have a little place there, so I go back down almost every month to shoot a little bit here and there. But we, here we have a nice big house and a yard, and something that when I married my wife in 2004, we had always said we wanted to sort of eventually have some space, And so we've got a little apartment in Soho in New York City, and we've got a really nice big house that I can pull up in front of the front door and park without having to worry about a $125 parking ticket. I mean, New York City, people go to New York City and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe you left New York City." It's like, well, you stay here for 19 years without a balcony or a backyard, or and sometimes you just want a little air.
At least you have options.
Yes, and I still go back down there. I still have a lot of corporate clients that I was working for. Still call me. They don't know I've left.
Well, send them a quick email now.
I still keep it that way, and I have my call forwarded. If you call my New York City cell phone, due to some very tricky little tricks I've learned, it rings at our house. It's a local call to them. It doesn't cost me anything, and I can sort of like maintain this sort of, I live in cyber world, baby,
Well, it's technology, right?
Yeah.
Now, I got to ask you, did you go to school for photography? Because I know in Toronto there's a lot of people that go to Ryerson or whatever and study
New York City, I don't know if I one guy I used to share a studio with, went to school. Nobody really, it's sort of really a kind of learn on the fly kind of thing.
Well, I mean, if you can do it.
Yeah.
And people like your work, I mean, I guess
And I come back, I mean, I've been at it so long now. I mean, I started shooting professionally in the early 90s, when you had to actually put film in a camera. No, I sort of, I sort of learned along the way, a variety of mishmash of ways. The best thing I ever did as a photographer when I first started out was get a dark room.
Oh, nice.
And I always believed that almost everything I learned was in the darkroom, because I get in there and I start jiggling that photo around and I'm like, why is that background that dark? And it posed more questions and helped me answer them in the darkroom. When I was standing there with the camera in my hand, it wouldn't, it just didn't.
Well, which begs I mean, it sounds like, now we're in the, you used to talk about those days where you had to put film in the camera. That's when you need the dark room. Right. Now with digital, you don't need a dark room. What does that say about new photographers that are growing up and they don't really maybe ever have the chance to use a dark room or to even understand or to learn the lessons the way you learned them?
It's just a new way of learning. I don't want to poo-poo it, because it's sort of like saying, digital recording now is, like people are recording albums digitally in their basement, and they're coming up with quality that's better than you would have gotten, 30 years ago. I'm not going to say that, they're harming themselves because they didn't learn the old-fashioned way. The old-fashioned way doesn't exist anymore. I don't have a camera that I could put film in, anymore. So.
But are there still some purists, like these audio people that insist on listening to a vinyl LP versus digital, and what about photography people that think
the only
same
people
way?
that still are into film are people professionally would be a fine art photographer that has no clients and has no deadlines. I mean, I've been on shoot. I remember this one time, this company I've shot a lot for, and this art director, really great guy. We had to go way down the Jersey Shore from New York City, and he drops me off, and he's calling me like, an hour and a half later, saying like, so when can I see the pictures? And I'm like, I haven't even got home yet. I'm not even at my computer. It's like, oh, we really need to see those pictures, And it's like, everybody wants to see them immediately, and there's nobody that will tolerate. Go, well, I gotta drop the film off. I'll get it on Thursday. I'll be able to show you contact sheets by Monday. It just doesn't happen. A fine art photographer that has all the time in the world is about the only one left that might, pretty much, work in film.
Now, you're here tonight for the PBN event, and what are you doing? You're just taking
I'm shooting headshots, corporate headshots for people that coming in that might require it.
But as you mentioned, you've done almost every kind of photography, or many different kinds.
I've shared my studio, and I've shared other people's studios with a million photographers, and every single one that I've ever had their one thing they do. One guy shot children. One guy shot cosmetics. Every single photograph he took was from here up. That's it. Whereas I got into performing arts, I did a lot of, like I say, actors' headshots and models and singers and dancers, and I did a lot of off-Broadway theater. I did the production stills for that, publicity photos and stuff like that. And, because I did headshots, when all of a sudden, the internet comes in, all of a sudden never before did accountants and lawyers need headshots. But now everybody that's on a website, any small business, everybody needs some kind of a headshot. So I started doing headshots for corporate, sort of company headshots. I'll go into a company and shoot 30 people in a day. Just one after the other, sort of do everybody all in one day.
It's booming.
I'll also go through there, and so that is sort of my headshot photography got me corporate headshots. Then what that led to is a lot of these companies will, on their websites and all their literature and that, have like some stock photography, and so I would go in there and photograph their people doing what they do, so they can pepper all their financial reports and flyers and all their publications with exactly their stuff. And then, all of a sudden they're throwing a big, huge event. So now I'm a corporate event guy, and it just sort of keeps, one job gets the next one, which isn't quite what I was doing before, but then this one, it just starts branching out. I started doing food and product shooting, I don't do a whole lot of that, but I talked to a guy 3 days ago, and it looks like I might have a monthly gig doing their monthly products,
So now you mentioned the fine art photography. Do you get into any of that kind of stuff?
My wife is constantly trying to get me to do more of it. I get so busy.
What does that mean, though, for you? Because that's something where you got to have the creative impulse, I would think. You can't do it because somebody else wants you to do
exactly, yeah. But, I do have the creative impulse, but I lack the time half the time. And she's like, well, you just got to make the time,
Yeah.
I mean, we had this, she says, you have a studio. You have everything. You're in the middle of Manhattan. You have the studio. We have everything that you need. You shouldn't waste that. You need to implement that, use it.
So just for a minute, just assuming you had all the time in the world, right?
What would I shoot?
What would you do with that?
Well, I'm going to go straight to the first idea that happens, and it actually comes from a job. I've worked for a couple of companies. It's going to sound like the most boring stuff you've ever heard, but I was shooting billboards for companies that need to sell space on those boards, and they need to see the traffic on the streets, and they need to see it look.
It's like real estate. It's kind of like real estate.
Well, it's sort of showing that fairly mundane street scene, but you really need to make that artwork pop on the side of the road. And I came to realize, I built those shots. When I do a shot in the end, I get a tripod, the cars get a little bit blurred. There might be not quite enough in that instance, so I'll sit there and just go bang, 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 and I'll layer in, put 2 or 3 more cars there, and I'll sort of like, and I've come up with some Toronto street scenes that are just gorgeous. And
now, are we going to be able to see any of those?
Yes, I will get you. I'll get you some of those.
We're seeing. There's one right there.
Right. And we'll edit that in. And so then what I did is my wife wanted me to make some greeting cards as a present, for some people, and I said, all right, I'll take those Toronto street scenes. Well, she's a belly dancer for a living, and so I took her very dramatic eyes with her heavy makeup, and instead of having the Viagra billboard, I swapped it out for her eyes. And my logo is I'm tipping my hat. It's just a hand and a fedora and all blackness, and I took it back in the days of film, all by myself in the middle of the studio in the middle of the night, with a time release on the camera, and just sort of ding, and I found out 3 days later if I managed to actually get the shot. There was no digital. Anyway, so what I've done is I've gone back through all those street scene stuff, because one job I had to do was 17 billboards in 17 locations all around Toronto, and they said, you need to make these, Caledonia and St. Clair look spectacular. But not too spectacular because it can't look too fake, right? So well, what do you want? St. Clair.
So how do you
Caledonia.
do that? I mean, because I've seen some streets in Toronto that you think of as major streets, but I've seen it on camera, and it looks like some dour street in Northern Ontario,
right?
Or something
well,
like that.
I'm telling you, there have been times where I have gone to one of these locations and gone, I don't know what I'm going to do here. I really don't know how I'm supposed to make this look good. But what I end up doing is building the shot, and I'll put a couple extra cars in, and I'll clean up all the sort of wires that are hanging.
Photoshop.
Oh yes, Photoshop is my middle name. So anyway, what I did is I put my wife's on bus shelters. I put my hat and like logo, and on the billboards I put my wife's just this eyes, as you will see when we edit it. I've sold a bunch of those. I've given them away, and people said, I'm not sending those out. I'm going to put them in frames. And I'm like, Caledonia and St. Clair in a frame? That's hard to believe.
You start framing it.
Well, for people from the neighborhood, at least as a start,
absolutely.
That'd be great.
So my wife is always these are amazing. You need to do more of this. You should have an entire Toronto street scene thing,
Do you think do you anticipate someday you'll have like an art show with your...
I've had a couple, and I would like to maybe again.
Yeah.
I would like to, yeah.
Okay.
I think the ones that I've had have been too miscellaneous. I think those, I just sort of it was pretty hodgepodge. I sort of pulled together all kinds of things that I'd done, as opposed to, I think those work better when you sort of go, all right, I'm going to do Toronto street scene.
A theme.
Boom.
Yeah.
And just sort of
sure. With a theme.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're here tonight, and there are people here walking around that are going to have the chance to get their picture taken by you. What else are you working on, or what's next for you, Kevin?
Well, I've gotten into the wedding market. I shot quite a lot of weddings in New York City and all the Eastern Seaboard, you know. And so that's the next thing I want to get right back into. We've been back a couple of years, and we took the first year to gut a house and completely put it back together. So we're sort of just getting going again in Toronto.
But see, that seems, you know, to have your wedding or whatever you're having done, as opposed to just getting somebody to show up and take some pictures, but to have an artist come there and turn your wedding into a work of art that you can.
And I did lots of.
I've
did some things that you don't normally see. Like I've taken audio recordings, the little microphones that we're wearing here, and recorded the vows, record the speeches, and record just sort of pinnacle moments, and put together a DVD slideshow of photos.
That's great.
Where when we get to the vow part, the music that I've put in it comes down, and you actually hear the vows.
Oh, that's nice.
Or you hear, you know, when we get to the speeches, you hear quotes, pinnacle quotes from the speeches mixed in. And it's not a video. And sometimes I think, well, if I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And I'm like, you know what? Every time I say I could do this, I'm getting it closer and closer to a video. I am going to start shooting them where I do have little clips of video. But I still want it to be something very different from a wedding video. One of them, I actually started the whole thing with that old song. I think Frank Sinatra sings. I think everybody did. He did it, she did it, everybody did it. Let's do it, let's fall in love. Old 40s song. And I went on and I got all kinds of little clips of cartoons and pictures of like kids kissing, and there's a kid kissing the nose of a pig, and just sort of mix this sort of like, you know, montage to start the wedding video, you know. So I'd like to try and think of stuff that, you know, you don't normally see.
Nice integration of creativity.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time, Kevin, but this is great. I think we've got a real picture of what you're all about and what you're doing here, and
there's so many cameras, I don't know which way we're going.
You don't have to even worry about that. But you know, this is Linda's first interview.
Yes.
Now, Linda, do you have any final question for Kevin here?
Well, no. Well, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I'm actually the old school film. I still have.
Is that right?
I still have a film camera at my place. So
I did, but I got my studio broken into in New York.
Oh no!
And they stole everything.
That's a drag.
And so it just didn't seem to make sense to be replacing the film cameras. All you know, the insurance check went to replacing all the digital stuff.
So Kevin, we got to tell people where to get in touch with you if they want to follow up. What's the best way for them to do that?
I have two websites. I have one is more of a studio website. It's www.foxphotography.net. And then I have another website. My wife and I shoot weddings and events and sort of family events, and that is called WeClick.com.
Okay, well, we're going to let people go to those sites and check it out, and we look forward to seeing what you're doing later tonight. And great to do this, Kevin. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, it's a little hot.
We're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back with our next guest as Liquid Lunch continues here from the Tula Restaurant and PBN. We'll be right back.
Thanks.
They did this with a device that allowed people to see and hear each other over great distances.
That was the television set. Every family on Earth had been issued one, and each day at the appointed hour, they'd watch to see if an antidote for the dying oceans had been discovered.
And finally, with only 14 months left, the leaders announced that a chemical had been found that could perhaps neutralize the poison. The old man remembered it well. Day and night they had worked to make enough of the chemical to spread across the oceans. Everyone had worked hard, and yet they had seemed to enjoy it. And during that time, even strangers would stop and talk to one another. Then had come the fateful day when thousands upon thousands of ships, loaded with the chemical, headed out to sea. After that, there were weeks of waiting to see if it had worked. The old man had turned 22 on the day that the results were announced. The oceans had not been neutralized. They had failed. 22 years old, his life just beginning, and now it was over. And the old man clenched his fist at the memory of that other time and looked at the lady in white as if it was her fault. But she continued with her story.
The nations of the world failed to save the oceans, but it wasn't really a failure. It only seemed that way. You see, the nations of the world had stopped fighting. War had come to an end. That was the real success.
They had all been faced with death, and he listened to her in disbelief as she went on.
The people of the world were shocked and angry. They tried so hard, and